Hello all, we have just heard about the release of 3 additional Israeli hostages and 5 Thai individuals, and we pray for the continued release of all of the hostages and for peace, as I always say, in our very broken world. This week's Parsha, Parshat Bo, will give me an opportunity to say a few words about how God, through Moshe, shows us how to teach others. In the midst of our Parsha, we come across a pivotal and well-observed text in Perek Yud 12 as the reading of the Fifth Aliyah. Let's explore this together, as well as focus on translations that many of us see, and how translations are, as I often say, also commentary, thus interpretive, versus what the verses actually convey, emphasizing the point that wherever possible, we must work the original text ever so carefully and rely on it, not on interpretive translations. We read in verse 21 of Perek Yud. ויקרא משה לכל זקני ישראל ויאמר עליהם, משכו וקחו לכם צאן למשפחותיכם ושחטו הפסח. Moshe summoned all of the elders of Israel and told them, draw yourselves away from idolatry, draw yourselves, mishchu, pull yourselves away, get for your families lambs for acquiring them in order to make the Passover offering. Now, Rashi wants us to understand that Moshe, Vayikra Moshe l'chol ziknei Yisrael, calls the elders, but the message is not specifically for them, but for the Bnei Yisrael. Mishchu, who are they pulling away? The Bnei Yisrael. Ukachu lachem, and who should take for themselves these lambs to offer? The Bnei Yisrael. Lemishpachotehem, for all of their families, not just the Ziknei Yisrael, not just the elders, and slaughter them. Now note, it is implied that there's a missing text here, so to speak, between Vayikra Moshe l'chol ziknei Yisrael vayomer, and then as it continues. According to the indicated understanding in this particular translation, the message is for the Bnei Yisrael. God tells Moshe, Moshe summons the Ziknei Yisrael, and they are to share this teaching. When I observe this, I'm always motivated to ask whether or not there's a lesson to consider here. The verse seems like it could be complete on its own, whereas the interpretation of it and what it means by parsing the various portions of it suggests that we have a transitional piece here that requires us to educate each other. Moshe to the Bnei Yisrael, to the Ziknei Yisrael, to the elders of Israel, the elders of Israel to the Bnei Yisrael, and Bnei Yisrael to their families. We then move on, and it continues. What are the instructions? Lakachtem agudat azuv tvaltem badam. Take a bundle of the hyssop, of this herb, and dip it into the blood in the basin. Then apply the basin to the lintel and the 2 doorposts. None of you may go out of this entrance of the house until morning. God will pass through Mitzrayim. God will pass through to strike Va'avar Hashem Vingof et Mitzrayim, and will see the blood and will mercifully pass over your houses. You must observe this as a rule for you and your children forever. Ushmartem et hadavar hazeh l'chuk lecha ulevanecha ad olam. Again, Moshe to the elders who are to instruct the Bnei Yisrael. This is what you are to do. You are to convey this to your families, and it is to be ad la'olam, forever. Then we go and we see what we all feel is a familiar text. והיה כי נבוא אל הארץ אשר ייתן השם לכם כאשר דיבר ושמרתם את העבודה הזאת. You will observe this service when you come into the land that God gives you. והיה כי יאמרו עליכם בניכם, מה העבודה הזאת לכם? And then the children, your children, will ask you, what is this service to you? ואמרתם זבח פסח הוא להשם אשר פסח על בתי בני ישראל במצרים. This is the Passover offering to God who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when plagues were dispensed upon the Egyptians and spared our homes. And at that point we read, Vayakod ha'am vayishtachavu. The people of Israel then bowed down and prostrated themselves. Vayalchu vayasu b'nei Yisrael kasher tzivah Hashem el Moshe ve'Aaron kenasu. The Israelites go and do exactly as God had instructed Moshe and Aaron. And remember, this instruction begins with the Ziknei Yisrael as well. And they do exactly what they are told. And then it says, almost as an afterthought, Va'aron kenas, Moshe va'Aaron asu. And Moshe and Aaron did it as well. Now, what's interesting here is that we go through this process, and then at the end, we're told, V'yalchu v'yasu b'nei Yisrael, before we're told about Moshe and Aaron. So as a teacher at heart, with many decades of this activity, I only know that I have been successful as a teacher when I see my students use the learning. V'yasu b'nei Yisrael kasher tzivah Hashem. God commands Moshe and Aaron and the Ziknei Yisrael, right? Moshe goes to the Ziknei Yisrael. But the success of the enterprise can only be determined by Vayalchu v'yasu b'nei Yisrael, that they went and did what they were told. So let's begin to unpack this text with the guidance of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zichron Shalom, who explains as follows. He states, this remains one of the most counterintuitive passages in all of our religious literature. Moshe is addressing the Israelites just days before their release. They have been exiles for 210 years. After an initial period of affluence and ease, they have been oppressed, enslaved, and their male children killed in an act of slow genocide. Now, after signs and wonders and a series of plagues that have brought the greatest empire of the ancient world to its knees, they are about to go free. Yet, Moshe does not talk about freedom, or the land flowing with milk and honey, or the journey that they will have to undertake in the desert. Instead, 3 times in this text, he turns to the distant future, when the journey is complete and the people, free at last, are in their own land and can offer these sacrifices. And what he talks about even at that point is not the land itself or the society they will have to build, or even the demands and responsibilities of freedom. Rather, V'yalchu v'yasu b'nei Yisrael kasher tzivah Hashem. Instead, he talks about education. Specifically, what is this service of yours? Your children will ask. And this is how you must answer. He talks about education. The questions that children may ask when the epic events that are happening now are at best a distant memory. He tells the Israelites to do what Jews have done from then till now. Tell your children the story. Do it in a maximally effective way. Reenact the drama of exile and exodus, slavery and freedom. Get your children to ask questions. Make sure that you tell the story as your own, not as some dry account of history. Say that the way you live and the ceremonies you observe are because of what God did for me. This is not about my ancestors, although clearly they are part of the story, but me. Make it vivid, make it personal, make it live. What will you do when your child says, Ma avodah hazot lachem? You will answer and you will tell him, and you will own the story. Let us look again at the last pasuk of this text. Vayachu v'yasu b'nei Yisrael kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe v'Aaron ken asu. The Israelites go and do exactly as God had instructed Moshe and Aaron. And then ken asu, they did too. Rashi explains as follows. This is written to tell us that the praise of the Israelites is that they did not omit any detail of the instruction of Moshe and Aaron, and that conveyed to them by their Ziknei Yisrael, their elders. What is the meaning of the additional Kain Asu? The teachers didn't just tell, they did. So the teachers in all of this, Moshe and Aaron, are kind of evaluated by the success of the students, but then they have to be part of it too. You don't just tell, you show by example. I would like for us to consider for just a moment the way in which this particular verse is cast. Notice that the learners, namely the Bnei Israel, are mentioned as having successfully learned and done what they were supposed to do before the teachers are indicated as having acted properly. What are we to learn from this? As I've often explained, while English provides us with two separate words, learn and teach, in Hebrew, the same shoresh, the same root, Lamed Mem Daled, is used. One is active and one is acted upon. In other words, one causes the other to learn. Hamilamed, the PL, for those of you that are into that. And without that connection, there is no teaching. In other words, the teaching is not evaluated by what the teacher says, but rather what the students do. It is not a separate activity unto itself. The other word that's used for teaching, the harot, has the rooted meaning of to show, not just to explain, not to command, but to show and exhibit. It is the same sheresh that gives us the word Torah. We are being shown, we are being taught by experience. We see God spoke to Moshe, and then Moshe conveyed the message to the Bnei Israel, to Aaron, or to whomever the learning was supposed to be transmitted. It is only through this transmission that we know that God's teaching was effective and successful, as was that of Moshe Rabbeinu as well. So now back to our verse. This, I believe, is the reason that the learners are mentioned before the teachers, for it is through their actions and initiatives that we know that Moshe and Aaron were successful. Imagine for a moment if we would apply this criteria to the educational process in all of our lives. So it is at the beginning of this text as well. Moshe summons all of the elders of Israel. Vayikra Moshe l'chol ziknei Yisrael vayomer alehem. Stop. Mishchu. Draw yourselves. What? So Rashi wants us to think or say away from idolatry. Get your lambs, slaughter them, acquire them for yourselves, and slaughter them, b'shichtei ha-Pesach, for the purposes of Pesach. While the English translation we often use will insert text according to Rashi and other commentators to preempt questions that may present, the actual text, carefully transcribed, only references Moshe's words and instructions to the elders themselves. It is presumed that they, the learners in this instance, will then become the teachers and will then pass on what they have observed to the Bnei Israel, just as we often talk about the concept of midor ledor. For those of you from Cage who are listening to this, that was our theme song. The idea of Jewish practice, observance, and learning that is passed from generation to generation. We do and absorb what we see others do and absorb who came before us, and then we learn, we follow their example, and then we become the teachers. In other words, as a reframing of the well-known adage goes, we are to do as they do according to what they say, and then pass on the deeds and teachings and experiences to the next generation. We replicate this with the very practice of Seder. The preparations for Pesach, the bringing together of the different generations and their dialogue during this scripted experience. It is the paradigmatic example of the question often posed about who is a successful Jew. the one with generations of Jews after them. As we know all too well, the Pesach Seder, or some semblance of it, remains the most widely practiced of all Jewish observances amongst the masses, outrunning the lighting of the Chanukiah and any even the slightest observance of Yom Kippur. This has been the case in Jewish communities again and again throughout the ages. It is our most defining story as a nation born through it, and in its continuity as generation shares it with future generations. As Aviva Zornberg explains regarding this element of our learning, our doing, and our very being, we draw on the Midrashic and Hasidic sources as well as on psychoanalytical thought as we explore the birth of a single individual and a nation. Moshe and Israel emerged from a profound exodus from the traumas of exile, especially from the exile that the Midrash calls the exile of the word. Moshe, child of two mothers and two cultures, weighed down by a speech impediment, mirrors the developmental struggles of the people that he leads. He is selected for greatness for the sake of this people, leading by example. We will now follow the arc of this symbiotic relationship between Moshe and Israel throughout the book of Shemot, as Zornberg teaches us. It is here, in this carefully crafted context, that we have the very foundation of that symbiotic relationship between Moshe and Israel. Its continuity is dependent on us, learners turned into teachers from generation to generation forever, as the text states, le'olam. As we return to our text, let's carefully consider the following. You must observe this as a rule for your children and forever. Ushmartam et hadavar hazeh lachuk lecha ulevanecha ad olam. Forever. Et hadavar hazeh. This thing. Notice this thing is defined in the interpretive translation. Chak lecha. This is law for you. Ulevanecha. And your children. Ad olam. It is a chuk, whether we understand it or not, as it goes with chukim, for all generations. As we are taught later in Sefer Devarim, these teachings are both for those who witnessed all that happened, and especially, even, for those for whom this experience will have to be taught and learned, repeated, reenacted carefully, so that all will have some visceral connection to these seminal events that birthed us as a nation, and each of us as an individual. You must maintain this service once you have come to the land that God has given you, as God has spoken. This practice will occur when the Bnei Yisrael complete their journey to sovereignty and identity as a people, as a nation. Only then can this nation ensure its own continuity, not subjected to the limitations of others. Think again of chapters in our history where oppression was beyond manageable. And yet, through the horrors of the Holocaust, the years of the isolation of Soviet Jews, and so many other challenges that would seem insurmountable, including today, and too many families of our people, Jews continue to try to share, to do, and to teach through this experience of a retelling of this chapter in which our peoplehood was solidified. And when your children ask you, what is this service of yours? You must answer, it is the Pesach offering to God who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when God plagued the Egyptians and spared our homes. And then the people bowed down and prostrated themselves. What exactly is anticipated here? The day will come when our children, future generations, will be so far removed from the events that they will ask, Ma avodah hazot lachem? What does this mean to you? We're here. It's already part of us. remember that it will be the furthest removed child who will pose this particular question. Lachem, what is this service to you, not to me? I am removed from you. In other words, what he's really saying is, this means nothing to me. I dare you to tell me why you think it's so important. The answer? This experience from long ago is present today in our hearts, in our minds, and in our experiences that we are presently dealing with. We, the learners, must continue to practice and observe these elements of our core identity so that the teachings of our teachers continue all the way back to Moshe. Otherwise, they die with us. This, no less than the exodus from slavery to the claiming of agency that Pesach notes, is the most important element of this experience. May God's presence, may the Shekhinah continue to be reflected in our lives as teachers and learners and teachers and learners. Shabbat Shalom.